The note was 2 words long, 2 words that would save a billionaire's life and shatter the carefully constructed trap designed to end it. Don't move. Victor Ashford didn't see it coming. How could he? He was sitting at the center table of the Ashford Meridian Hotel's private dining lounge, surrounded by polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of wealth that makes security feel like a birthright. He was scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that 3 men in the room weren't there to serve dinner. They were there to make sure he never left alive. But someone else had noticed. Talia Brooks moved between the tables like a shadow, refilling water glasses with the practiced efficiency of someone the rich had learned to ignore. Black apron, hair pulled back, eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. To every guest in that room, she was furniture, background noise in human form. They had no idea she was the most dangerous person there, because Talia had spent 2.5 years preparing for this moment. 2.5 years working her way into this hotel, into this shift, into this exact position. Not for revenge, not yet. Tonight was about something more complicated. Tonight was about keeping Victor Ashford alive long enough to understand what he'd destroyed. And the clock was ticking. She'd spotted the first red flag 20 minutes into her shift. The bartender who'd been replaced at the last minute with someone whose hands moved wrong, who handled bottles like he'd never worked a bar in his life. Then the security guard stationed too close to the east exit, the one who kept checking his watch with military precision. And finally, the man near the pillar, wearing a server's uniform, but standing with the posture of someone trained to kill. Patterns. Talia had been trained to see patterns, and this pattern screamed assassination. She knew who was behind it without needing confirmation. Miles Fenwick, Victor's closest business partner, his public ally, his private enemy. The man who smiled for cameras while quietly orchestrating Victor's destruction. 3 years ago, Fenwick had made a choice that destroyed innocent lives to cover his own crimes. When Victor had unknowingly benefited from that destruction, it had created a rift between the partners that had been festering ever since. Talia knew because she'd paid the price for Fenwick's crimes. Her brother's face was burned into her memory, the hollow look in his eyes when he realized he'd been framed, when he understood that Miles Fenwick had used him as a scapegoat, and Victor Ashford's name had been the shield that made it work. The case had closed quietly. Her brother's life had ended in a prison cell 18 months into his sentence. Officially a suicide, but Talia knew better. Ryan Brooks had been murdered to keep him silent about what he'd discovered. That was 3 years ago. Talia had made a choice that night. Both men would answer for what they'd done. Fenwick for orchestrating it, Victor for allowing his empire to be used as a weapon. But not like this. Not with a bullet that would let Fenwick inherit everything and bury the truth forever. So when she approached Victor's table and set down his water, her hand moved with surgical precision. The folded note slipped beneath his phone so smoothly that even the security cameras wouldn't catch it. Victor frowned, annoyed at first. Then he unfolded the paper. Don't move. Assassins in room. Call your private security now. This is real. His fingers froze. His breath caught. And for the first time in years, Victor Ashford felt something he'd nearly forgotten. Genuine fear. He looked up slowly, trying to find the waitress, but she was already gone, disappearing into the background like she'd never existed. And in that moment, Victor understood something terrifying. The woman who had just warned him knew more about the danger surrounding him than his entire security team. The trap was set. The clock was running. And the only person keeping him alive was a woman whose face he couldn't even remember. If you enjoy deep, layered stories like this, stories about power, revenge, and the invisible people who see everything, please consider subscribing. These videos take dozens of hours to research, write, record, and edit. Your support keeps these stories alive. 3 years earlier, Talia Brooks had been someone else entirely. She'd been a forensic financial analyst at Barrett & Associates, a mid-tier investigative firm that specialized in uncovering corporate fraud. She was brilliant at it, the kind of analyst who could look at a balance sheet and see the ghost signatures of manipulated numbers, who could trace money through shell companies like following breadcrumbs through a forest. Her professor at Wharton had called her a prodigy. The SEC had tried to recruit her twice. But Talia had chosen Barrett specifically because they investigated firms like Ashford International, massive corporate empires where fraud hid behind layers of legitimacy, and billion-dollar legal teams. She'd wanted to make a difference, believed that intelligence and integrity could expose corruption. She'd been catastrophically naive. Her younger brother Ryan had been different from her, less cynical, more idealistic. He'd gotten a job as a junior analyst at Meridian Capital, an investment fund that did frequent business with Ashford International. He was good at his work, careful with numbers, the kind of employee who stayed late to make sure everything balanced perfectly. That carefulness had made him the perfect scapegoat. When Miles Fenwick needed someone to blame for a fraud scheme that had siphoned $180 million through falsified investment accounts, Ryan's name appeared on documents he'd never seen, authorizing transactions he'd never approved. By the time Talia understood what was happening, her brother was already in federal custody. She'd used every skill she possessed to prove his innocence, traced the actual fraud back through 7 shell companies to its source, built documentation showing that Ryan's credentials had been stolen, that the digital signatures were forgeries, that the timing of the transactions proved he couldn't have authorized them. She discovered something else too. The fraud was sophisticated enough that it had to come from someone high up, someone with deep knowledge of both Meridian Capital and Ashford International systems, someone like Miles Fenwick. But when she tried to present her evidence, Victor Ashford's legal team had crushed her. Every document she'd obtained through unauthorized access to private corporate systems was deemed inadmissible. Every witness she'd found suddenly couldn't remember key details. Every thread she'd pulled had been cut by lawyers who cost more per hour than she made in a month. The judge had looked at Ryan with something like pity and pronounced him guilty. 18 months into his sentence, Ryan had been found dead in his cell. The prison called it suicide. Talia had driven 6 hours to identify the body and seen the marks on his neck that didn't match the official story. Her brother had been murdered because of what he knew about Fenwick's fraud and how Victor Ashford's empire had provided cover for it, whether Victor knew it or not. The case closed. Fenwick and Victor continued their partnership, appearing together at charity galas and industry conferences. The world moved on. Talia did not. She'd sold everything she owned, changed her appearance, cut her distinctive red hair short and dyed it brown, started wearing contacts instead of her signature glasses, learned to move differently. She'd taken jobs that kept her invisible, working her way into the service industry where the wealthy gathered but never really saw the staff. It took 8 months to get hired at the Ashford Meridian Hotel, another 1.5 years to work her way onto evening shifts in the private dining lounge, where both Victor and Fenwick occasionally held confidential meetings. She'd learned their patterns, their schedules, the security protocols, the gaps in surveillance. She'd been planning to expose them both, to gather evidence of their current crimes and tie them publicly to Ryan's death in a way that couldn't be buried by expensive lawyers. But tonight, she'd seen something that changed everything. Tonight, she'd realized that Miles Fenwick was planning to kill Victor Ashford and take control of the entire empire. And if Victor died, the truth about Ryan died with him. Fenwick would inherit everything, bury the evidence even deeper, and Talia would never get justice. So she'd made a split-second decision that went against every instinct screaming for revenge. She'd saved him. Victor Ashford was alive because of her. He owed her a debt he didn't even know existed yet. And when the time came, when she finally stepped out of the shadows and made him understand what his negligence had cost, he would learn that survival wasn't mercy. It was leverage. Miles Fenwick had the kind of face people trusted instinctively. Warm smile, steady eye contact, the ability to make you feel like the most important person in the room, while he calculated exactly how to use you. It was a mask he'd perfected over decades. Talia had studied him obsessively. On paper, he was Victor Ashford's ideal partner. They'd attended Wharton together, built Ashford International from a regional investment firm into a global empire, appeared on magazine covers with matching smiles and perfectly coordinated answers about their vision for the future. But Talia had learned to see past masks. The breaking point between the partners had come 3 years ago. Victor had made a unilateral decision on a major acquisition, restructuring the deal in a way that cut Fenwick's personal stake by 60%. It was legal, technically within Victor's authority as majority shareholder, but it had cost Fenwick nearly $400 million in projected returns. Fenwick had smiled at the press conference announcing the deal, had publicly supported his partner's bold strategic vision. Privately, he'd begun planning Victor's destruction. Talia had first understood Fenwick's guilt 6 months ago. She'd been serving at a private dinner when she'd overheard him on his phone in the hallway, speaking in the clipped tones of someone issuing orders to subordinates. The Brooks situation was handled correctly 3 years ago. Same protocols apply now. Remove the obstacle. Make it look natural. No connections. She'd nearly dropped the water pitcher she was carrying. Brooks' situation, her brother. Fenwick had just confirmed what she'd suspected, that Ryan's death hadn't been suicide, that Fenwick had ordered it when Ryan got too close to discovering the fraud. She'd kept her face neutral, her movements mechanical, and listened to every word as Fenwick described a plan to eliminate Victor through a staged medical emergency during a public event. That was the moment Talia's mission had evolved. It wasn't just about exposing what had happened to Ryan anymore. It was about making sure that when justice came, it consumed both men who destroyed her brother. Fenwick for orchestrating it, Victor for creating the corporate system that made it possible. But they had to both be alive for that reckoning. Tonight's assassination attempt was elegant in its simplicity. Fenwick was across town at a charity gala, 300 witnesses, photographers capturing his every movement, the perfect alibi. Meanwhile, his hired operatives were here, disguised as hotel staff, executing a plan that would end with Victor dead from an apparent cardiac event, and Miles Fenwick inheriting controlling interest in Ashford International. Talia watched the fake bartender check the time for the third time in 5 minutes. 8:47 p.m. The medical emergency would start in moments. A planted guest would collapse, drawing security away from Victor's position, creating exactly 17 seconds of chaos for the shooter near the pillar to take his shot with a suppressed weapon. Then the compromised medical examiner would declare it a heart attack. The body would be handled by Fenwick's people, and by tomorrow morning, Miles Fenwick would be the grieving partner, giving tearful interviews about his devastating loss. It was perfect, ruthless, exactly the kind of operation that had killed Ryan 3 years ago. Fenwick himself wasn't capable of such violence directly. He was too refined for that, too accustomed to having others execute his orders while he maintained plausible deniability. But he was absolutely capable of orchestrating it, of selecting exactly the right people and paying exactly the right price to make a problem disappear. He'd done it to Ryan. Now he was doing it to Victor. And Talia was the only person in the room who understood the full scope of what was about to happen. She looked at the note she'd written in the kitchen. Clear, specific, impossible to misinterpret. Not cryptic drama, practical survival. She approached Victor's table with the timing she'd practiced 100 times in her mind, set down his water with steady hands, and slipped the note beneath his phone with a motion so smooth the cameras would show nothing unusual. Then she walked away without looking back. The next move was his. Whether he lived or died would determine whether her brother's death had meant anything at all. If you discovered that two powerful men were both responsible for your sibling's death, one who orchestrated it and one who enabled it, would you save them from each other just to make sure they both face justice? Or would you let one kill the other? What no one in that dining room knew, what even Victor Ashford wouldn't discover for months, was that Talia Brooks had once been the kind of analyst that corporate criminals feared. Her talent had revealed itself early. At Wharton, while other students struggled with case studies about Enron and WorldCom, Talia had seen the patterns instantly. The way fraudulent accounting created rhythms that legitimate numbers never did. The subtle imbalances that revealed hidden transactions. The mathematical signatures of money being moved through systems designed to hide it. She'd finished her forensic accounting degree in 3 years with the kind of recommendations that made recruiters call her directly. The SEC had offered her a position twice. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had tried to recruit her. Major investigative firms had competed for her attention. She'd chosen Barrett and Associates because they went after the biggest targets. The corporations that were too large to fail and too connected to prosecute. The empires built on layers of legitimacy that hid the rot underneath. She'd believed she could make a difference. Then Ryan's case had taught her a brutal lesson. Evidence only mattered if the system allowed it to matter. She'd used every skill she possessed to prove her brother's innocence. Had traced the fraud that framed him through 7 shell companies registered in 3 countries. Had documented the pattern of credential theft that showed Ryan's identity had been stolen months before the illegal transactions began. Had built a timeline proving he was physically in a different state when half the fraudulent authorizations supposedly occurred. She'd even identified the real architect of the scheme, tracking the money back to accounts controlled by a partnership that included Miles Fenwick's private holdings. It should have been enough. It would have been enough in any system that cared about truth. But Victor Ashford's legal team had destroyed her case with a single motion. Everything she discovered through unauthorized access was inadmissible. The judge had barely looked at her evidence before dismissing it. Ryan had been convicted on manufactured evidence, while the real criminal walked free. After his death, Talia had made a choice. Her skills were useless in a system designed to protect men like Fenwick and Ashford, so she'd buried them. Became invisible, took jobs that required no credentials, and asked no questions. But the skills hadn't disappeared. They'd just gone underground. For 2.5 years, she'd been building a case from the shadows, using library computers to track Ashford International's transactions, documenting patterns from internet cafes, slowly, carefully reconstructing the evidence that would prove both men's guilt in a way that couldn't be suppressed by expensive lawyers. She knew about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that held money from Fenwick's fraud schemes. She knew about the shell companies that existed only to move illegal payments. She knew about the subsidiary that had been used to launder the funds that framed Ryan. She knew everything. And Victor Ashford had no idea that the waitress who just saved his life could also destroy it. That combination, salvation and annihilation held in the same invisible hands, was the leverage she'd been building toward for 3 years. Tonight she'd played the first card. Soon, Victor would learn there was an entire deck waiting. And when the time came for him to understand what his empire had cost, Talia would be the one holding all the evidence he couldn't suppress. The plan unraveled at 8:51 p.m. Victor read the note twice, his expression shifting from irritation to sharp focus in the span of 3 seconds. Then his hands moved with decisive speed, pulling out his phone, typing rapidly with his thumbs. The medical emergency started right on schedule. A guest 3 tables away suddenly clutched his chest, gasping dramatically. His companions screamed for help. 2 hotel security guards moved toward the commotion exactly as choreographed. But Victor Ashford didn't move. He stayed perfectly still in his chair, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the low, urgent tones of someone who understood exactly what kind of danger he was facing. Talia watched from her position near the service station as confusion rippled through the fake operatives. The man near the pillar touched his earpiece, frowning. The timing was wrong. The target wasn't positioned correctly. The 17-second window for a clean shot was about to close. The shooter's hand moved toward his jacket. Then the doors burst open, and 8 men in tactical gear poured into the dining room. Not hotel security, but private military contractors moving with lethal efficiency. They spread out instantly, securing exits, isolating the medical emergency, their eyes scanning the room with professional threat assessment. Victor's personal security team, the ones who answered directly to him, not to any hotel management that Fenwick might have compromised. The fake medical emergency evaporated. The victim recovered miraculously, trying to stand up and leave. One of the tactical team stopped him with a hand on his shoulder, gentle but absolutely firm. "Stay seated, sir. We're going to need to verify everyone's identity." The shooter near the pillar bolted. It was a fatal mistake. Movement drew every trained eye in the room. 2 of Victor's team intercepted him before he made it 5 steps, taking him down with brutal efficiency. The suppressed pistol clattered across the marble floor, stopping inches from a horrified guest's feet. The dining room erupted into chaos. Real chaos this time, not the choreographed distraction Fenwick had planned. Guests scrambling away from the violence, staff freezing in confusion. The remaining conspirators trying desperately to blend in and disappear. But Victor's team was systematic. They locked down every exit within 30 seconds, started checking credentials, guests, staff, anyone who'd been in the room. Facial recognition software running on tablets, comparing faces to databases in real time. The fake bartender was identified within 2 minutes. Hotel records showed he'd been scheduled for a different shift entirely. The replacement order had come through a hacked administrative account 45 minutes before the dinner service began. The compromised security guard was next. His background check had been falsified. The real Marcus Torres was currently unconscious in a supply closet on the 3rd floor, his uniform and credentials stolen. One by one, Fenwick's carefully selected operatives were exposed and detained with humiliating efficiency. Police arrived 7 minutes after Victor's initial call, but not through standard dispatch. These were detectives from a special unit, brought in through channels that bypassed whatever bought loyalty Fenwick had arranged in the department. Talia kept moving through the chaos, clearing tables, appearing busy, making sure no one looked at her too closely. She'd worked enough high-pressure events to know how to become furniture. People's eyes slid right past service staff when something more interesting was happening. But Victor was scanning the room, clearly trying to find the person who'd warned him. His memory of her face would be vague. She'd been careful about that, keeping her head down, never making direct eye contact. But he was trying. Within 20 minutes, the dining room had transformed from a death trap into a crime scene controlled entirely by Victor's people. Fenwick's operatives were in police custody. Evidence was being collected under Victor's direct supervision. The conspiracy was unraveling in real time with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd clearly prepared for exactly this kind of threat. Talia felt a cold realization settle over her. She'd underestimated Victor Ashford. He wasn't just a ruthless businessman who'd allowed his empire to be used as cover for Fenwick's crimes. He was someone who'd survived this long in a world of predators because he was smarter, faster, and more paranoid than his enemies. The note had warned him, but his response had been entirely his own, surgical, devastating, and absolutely in control. Across town at the charity gala, Miles Fenwick's phone was lighting up with messages he couldn't answer without revealing that he knew something was wrong. His perfect alibi was about to become the evidence of his guilt, and Talia had just saved the one man who could help her destroy the other. The interrogation room was designed for intimidation. Concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lights, a steel table bolted to the floor. The man sitting across from Victor's head of security, Marcus Chen, should have been intimidated. Instead, Thomas Krieg looked like a professional calculating his options. Former military intelligence, currently freelance contractor for the highest bidder. Krieg had lawyer written all over his posture. Silent, patient, waiting for representation that would arrive with enough legal firepower to bury this situation in procedural delays. But Marcus had worked for Victor Ashford long enough to know that legal firepower only mattered when evidence was ambiguous. This evidence was crystal clear. "You were hired to kill Victor Ashford tonight," Marcus said conversationally, "inserted as a bartender through a credential swap arranged at 4:15 p.m., brought a weapon into the building concealed in a service cart that bypassed screening because the guard on duty, currently also in custody, was paid to disable the scanners." Krieg's expression remained neutral, but Marcus saw the micro-reaction, surprised that they documented the timeline so precisely. "The medical emergency was your distraction signal. Your partner had the angle, 17 seconds during the chaos for a suppressed shot that would be blamed on cardiac event. Victim pronounced dead on scene, body moved to a facility where the autopsy would confirm whatever narrative your employer needed." Marcus pulled out a tablet, turned it so Krieg could see. Security footage from the parking garage, Krieg receiving the weapon from a man whose face was partially visible. "We have your communications, encrypted poorly enough that our team broke them in 40 minutes. We have your payment trail, cryptocurrency routed through exchanges in Zurich and Singapore, ultimately traceable to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands." He leaned forward. "Here's what you don't understand. Victor Ashford wasn't supposed to be warned. Someone in that room saw your entire operation and destroyed it with a note. Someone better at this than you are." For the first time, Krieg's composure cracked slightly, confusion mixed with anger. "You're a professional," Marcus continued, "but someone made you look like an amateur. And now your employer has a problem. A witness who saw everything and had the skill to recognize it." He stood, closing the tablet. "You can wait for your lawyer. Play this out through the courts, but understand something. Your employer now knows you failed publicly. You're not an asset anymore. You're a liability." Marcus walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "How long do you think you'll survive in lockup before they decide you know too much?" He left Krieg alone with that thought. Across town, Miles Fenwick stood in a bathroom stall at the charity gala, staring at his phone with barely contained fury. 9 missed calls, 23 messages, all from numbers he recognized, all using coded language that meant the same thing: complete, catastrophic failure. Victor was alive. The entire team was in custody. The plan had imploded so spectacularly that police were already asking questions about the suspicious pattern of credential swaps and equipment malfunctions. Fenwick gripped the phone until his knuckles went white. This was supposed to be clean, untraceable, a tragic accident that left him in control of Ashford International by morning. Instead, it was a disaster that would lead investigators directly to... His phone buzzed with a new message. "Unknown number. We need to talk about your problem. The evidence trail leads to you within 48 hours, unless someone makes those connections disappear. Alone. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Riverside Park, North Bench. Come alone or the police get everything." Fenwick's blood ran cold. Someone knew. Someone had been watching not just tonight's operation, but the entire structure behind it. He deleted the message with shaking hands, flushed the toilet for appearances, and walked back out into the gala with a smile that felt like shattered glass. Someone had just made him an offer. Not salvation, leverage. And Miles Fenwick, who'd spent 30 years manipulating others, suddenly understood what it felt like to be trapped. Somewhere in this city, someone was holding his entire future in their hands. And tomorrow, he'd find out what they wanted in exchange for his survival. If you were investigating this case and you knew there was a mystery person who'd warned the victim and saved his life, would you try to find them immediately? Or would you worry that exposing them might put them in danger from whoever hired the assassins? Victor Ashford didn't sleep that night. He stood in his penthouse office overlooking the city, turning the note over in his hands like it might reveal secrets under the right light. Don't move. Assassins in room. Call your private security now. This is real. The handwriting was deliberate, printed block letters, carefully anonymous, but something about the precise spacing and confident strokes suggested someone educated, controlled, professional. Someone who'd seen a military-grade assassination operation and understood it completely, had recognized the patterns, identified the players, and made the split-second decision to intervene with perfect timing and absolute clarity. Pull every piece of security footage from that room, Victor said to Marcus. I want to see everyone who approached my table in the hour before I got that note. Within 30 minutes they had it, 12 different angles, time-stamped and synchronized. Most of the staff appeared multiple times. Water refills, checking on meals, clearing plates, standard service patterns. But one person appeared only 4 times, always with perfect timing, never lingering, movements economical and professional. A woman, mid-20s, brown hair pulled back, plain features made plainer by the uniform, the kind of face designed to be instantly forgettable. But Victor's instincts, honed by 3 decades of reading people across negotiating tables, screamed that something about her was different. Freeze that frame, he said. Who is she? Marcus pulled up the employee file. Talia Brooks, hired 8 months ago. Background check came back clean. Previous hospitality experience, good references, no issues. Interview her. Tonight. Sir, it's 2 a.m. Now. Talia was awake when her phone rang. She'd been expecting this. The hotel manager apologized profusely for calling so late, explained there was a security situation, that all staff who'd worked the private dining room needed to come in for brief interviews to help police with their investigation. Routine. Nothing to worry about, just a formality. Talia dressed carefully, same style of plain clothes she always wore, hair pulled back the same way. Nothing that would make her memorable. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in her mind hundreds of times. The interview room at Ashford Tower was nothing like the hotel conference room she'd expected. It was the kind of space where billion-dollar deals were made, expensive furniture, artwork that belonged in museums, windows overlooking a city that carried the Ashford name on half its buildings. Victor Ashford stood by the window, studying her reflection in the glass. Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, Mr. Ashford. She kept her voice respectful, neutral, the voice of someone accustomed to serving the wealthy. You were working the center section last night. Yes, sir. He turned to face her, and his eyes were sharp with intelligence that had built an empire. Did you notice anything unusual? Anyone behaving strangely? She pretended to think, letting the pause be natural rather than rehearsed. The bartender seemed off. He didn't pour drinks the way someone experienced would. I thought it was odd. What else? The security guard near the east exit kept checking his watch. More than normal, like he was timing something. She'd identified both compromised positions, but she was presenting it as observations she'd only just realized were significant, not as real-time threat assessment. Victor studied her face with an intensity that made her grateful for 2.5 years of practice being invisible. Did you interact with me directly last night? Only to serve water and check if you needed anything, sir. Did you give me anything? A note? A message? No, sir. The lie was perfect. She'd practiced it so many times that her body showed none of the micro-expressions that usually accompany deception. No increased blink rate, no facial flushing, no hand movements toward her face. She'd learned these skills tracking down white-collar criminals. Now she was using them to hide in plain sight. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't believe her, or rather, his instincts were telling him something wasn't right, even if he couldn't prove it. Thank you for your time, Ms. Brooks. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. She nodded politely and left with the same measured pace she'd maintained since arriving. But as she walked to the elevator, she felt his eyes on her back. Watching, analyzing, suspecting. She'd bought herself time, but not much. Victor Ashford was too intelligent to let this go. Eventually, he'd dig deeper. Eventually, he'd find inconsistencies in her background. Eventually, he'd realize the invisible waitress who'd noticed everything wasn't who she claimed to be. The question was whether she'd accomplish her mission before he figured out her real identity. The background check came back 72 hours later, and something about it bothered Victor immediately. On paper, Talia Brooks was exactly what she should be, unremarkable. Born in Pennsylvania to middle-class parents, bachelor's degree in business from Penn State, employment history in retail and hospitality, no criminal record, no significant debt, no red flags anywhere. But Victor hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by accepting surface-level information. "This is too clean," he said to Marcus, studying the file for the third time. 26 years old and there's nothing interesting anywhere. No speeding tickets, no college disciplinary issues, no social media presence beyond the basic minimum. "That's not inherently suspicious," Marcus pointed out. "Some people are just careful." Careful people don't have the kind of observational skills she demonstrated. She identified both compromised operatives instantly, the fake bartender and the planted security guard. That's not normal vigilance. That's training. Marcus pulled up another document. "I had our team dig deeper. Her employment at Barrett & Associates ended 3 years ago, right before she went into hospitality work. Before that, she was on track to be a star forensic analyst." Victor's attention sharpened. Forensic analyst, as in financial investigation? Exactly. She had recommendations from professors at Wharton. The SEC tried to recruit her twice. Then suddenly she's working retail and hotel shifts? Marcus paused. People don't usually go backwards in their careers unless something forces them to. What happened 3 years ago? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus pulled up another file, this one much thicker. Her younger brother Ryan Brooks was convicted of financial fraud connected to a scheme that ran through Meridian Capital, one of our subsidiary investment partners. He died in prison 18 months into his sentence, officially ruled suicide. Victor felt ice forming in his chest. When did she start working at the hotel? 8 months ago, 6 months after a failed appeal on her brother's case was rejected. Marcus met his eyes. "Sir, I think we need to consider the possibility that she's been planning something, that her presence in that dining room wasn't coincidental." "Then why would she save my life?" "Maybe she needs you alive for something. Maybe—" Marcus stopped himself. "Say it." "Maybe whoever tried to kill you last night was also connected to her brother's case, and she saved you because she needs both of you alive to expose what really happened." The theory hit Victor like physical impact. He stood pacing to the window. If Marcus was right, then Talia Brooks wasn't a vigilant employee who'd noticed suspicious behavior. She was someone who'd spent years building the skills to recognize criminal operations because she'd been hunting the people responsible for her brother's death. And somehow, both Victor and the assassin who tried to kill him were connected to that case. "Pull everything on the Ryan Brooks conviction," Victor ordered. "I want to know who prosecuted, who testified, what evidence was used, and I want to know which Ashford International attorneys were involved." The file arrived within hours, and what Victor read made his blood run cold. Ryan Brooks had been convicted of fraud at Meridian Capital based on evidence that showed his credentials authorizing illegal transactions. The defense had tried to present forensic analysis proving the credentials were stolen. Analysis done by Talia Brooks herself. Victor's legal team had gotten that evidence thrown out on technicalities. The prosecutor had been aggressive, the conviction swift. Ryan Brooks had been sentenced to 6 years. 18 months later, he was dead. And the pattern of fraud he'd been blamed for, the shell companies, the routing of illegal funds, matched perfectly with schemes Victor's forensic accountants had recently traced back to Miles Fenwick. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. Ryan Brooks had been framed for crimes Miles Fenwick committed. Framed using Meridian Capital, which did business with Ashford International. Convicted because Victor's lawyers had suppressed exonerating evidence without Victor ever knowing the details. An innocent man had died because Victor hadn't paid attention to what his legal team was protecting. And that man's sister had just saved Victor's life. Not out of mercy, but because she needed both perpetrators alive to expose what they'd done. Victor picked up his phone and made a call. "Marcus, bring Talia Brooks back in. And this time I'm asking different questions." Miles Fenwick arrived at Riverside Park at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, scanning the area with the paranoid attention of someone who understood he was walking into a trap but had no choice. The park was public enough to be safe. Joggers, dog walkers, the morning crowd that made assassination difficult. Private enough for conversation that wouldn't be overheard. Talia sat on the north bench wearing sunglasses and a jacket she'd bought specifically for this meeting. Generic, forgettable, nothing that would stand out in security footage or witness memory. She'd debated this approach for 3 days. The smart play was to stay invisible. Let Victor and Fenwick destroy each other while she built her case from the shadows. But Victor had started digging into her background. It was only a matter of time before he connected her to Ryan. And once he did, she'd lose the element of surprise that had kept her alive this long. So she was gambling, using the chaos of the failed assassination to apply pressure to the one person who had the most to lose. Fenwick sat down beside her without looking directly at her face. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what you did 3 years ago, and what you tried to do 3 nights ago." His jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "A confession, recorded, describing how you orchestrated the fraud that framed Ryan Brooks, how you used Meridian Capital to move illegal funds, how you ensured Victor Ashford's legal team would suppress evidence that proved Ryan's innocence." "You're insane. I'll never—" "You will." Talia's voice was ice. "Because the alternative is that every piece of evidence I've gathered over the past 3 years goes directly to the FBI. Cryptocurrency trails connecting you to Thomas Krieg, shell companies tied to the fraud that killed my brother, communications proving you ordered a hit on Victor Ashford." Fenwick turned to look at her for the first time, and recognition dawned slowly. "Brooks, you're—" "Ryan Brooks's sister, yes, and I've spent every day since his death building the case that will destroy you." "Victor will never believe—" "Victor already suspects. His team pulled Ryan's case file yesterday. They're comparing the fraud patterns to your current operations. They're going to figure it out, Miles. The only question is whether you confess before they prosecute, or whether you go down fighting and take everyone with you." Fenwick's hands were shaking. "If I confess, I go to prison." "Yes, but you go to federal prison with a cooperation deal that keeps you alive. If you fight this, you'll end up in general population where every criminal you've ever betrayed can reach you." Talia leaned closer. "And they will reach you, Miles, because I'll make sure every person you've crossed knows exactly where you are." The threat hung between them like poison. "You have 48 hours, Talia said. Confess to the FBI with details about the fraud and Ryan's death, or I release everything I have to the media, law enforcement, and every rival you've ever made in the business world." She stood, leaving Fenwick on the bench looking 10 years older than he had when he'd arrived. Miles Fenwick's world collapsed within a week. He tried to run first, liquidating assets, arranging fake credentials, planning an escape that would put him beyond extradition. Talia had anticipated that. Every move he made was documented, photographed, and sent directly to the FBI task force that Victor had quietly activated. When the federal agents arrested him at a private airfield, his passport was flagged, his accounts frozen, and his future reduced to a choice between cooperation and life in prison. He chose cooperation. The confession was extensive. Years of fraud, multiple victims, shell companies, and the orchestrated framing of Ryan Brooks, a junior analyst who'd noticed irregular transactions and asked too many questions. Miles Fenwick had used Ryan's stolen credentials to authorize illegal transactions, then ensured the evidence trail led directly to the young man who couldn't afford the kind of legal defense needed to fight it. He'd paid off witnesses, manipulated evidence, and when Ryan had started gathering proof of his innocence from prison, Fenwick had paid for that problem to disappear permanently. The recording of that confession made every major news outlet within 48 hours. Miles Fenwick's name became synonymous with corporate corruption and calculated murder. And Victor Ashford, whose legal team had unknowingly helped suppress evidence that would have proven Ryan innocent, faced questions he couldn't avoid any longer. The summons came at 6 a.m., not from hotel management this time, directly from Victor Ashford, texted to Talia's personal phone, which meant his team had identified her real number, her real background, everything. My office, 10 a.m. I know who you are. We need to talk. Talia stood in front of Ashford Tower at 9:53 a.m., wearing clothes she'd kept from her old life. Professional, but not expensive. The outfit of someone who'd once worked in corporate analysis before losing everything. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to judgment. Victor's assistant showed her directly into his office without the usual security screening. When the door closed behind her, she was alone with the man whose negligence had cost her brother his life. He stood at the window with his back to her, shoulders tense. "Ryan Brooks," he said without preamble, "your younger brother, convicted of fraud 3 years ago based on evidence my legal team helped suppress, died in prison 18 months into his sentence. You did your homework. I should have done it 3 years ago." He turned to face her, and his expression carried something she hadn't expected: genuine regret. "I didn't know. When my lawyers presented me with the Brooks case, they said there was an attempt to introduce inadmissible evidence. I signed off on the motion without reading the details. Because you trusted your team to protect you from accountability." "Yes." He didn't flinch from the accusation. "I built systems designed to insulate me from consequences. I hired people whose job was to make problems disappear. And your brother died because I didn't ask questions I should have asked." Talia felt her carefully controlled anger rising. He was 24 years old. He'd done nothing wrong. And you buried him under legal motions because it was easier than discovering that your business partner was using your company as cover for fraud. "I know." Victor's voice was quiet. "I've spent 3 days reading the actual evidence your team tried to present. The forensic analysis was brilliant. It proved Ryan's credentials were stolen, that he was framed. It should have exonerated him completely. But your lawyers had it thrown out. Because I told them to protect the company at all costs. Never question, never hesitate, just win." He moved to his desk, pulled out a folder. "This is my confession, signed, notarized, acknowledging that my legal team suppressed evidence in the Ryan Brooks case, accepting responsibility for the negligence that led to his conviction and death." Talia stared at the document. "Why would you?" "Because you saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. Because Fenwick is currently cooperating with the FBI, and his confession includes details about how he manipulated my legal systems to protect his crimes. Because," his voice cracked slightly, "because I looked at your brother's photo and saw someone who deserved better than he got." He slid the folder across the desk. "Take it, use it however you want. Give it to the press, the prosecutors. His name can be cleared publicly with me accepting responsibility for what my company did." Talia picked up the folder with shaking hands. This was what she'd wanted for 3 years. Acknowledgement, responsibility, justice for Ryan. But something about Victor's expression stopped her from simply walking away victorious. "What do you want in exchange?" she asked. "Nothing. This isn't a negotiation." He paused. "But I am offering you something beyond the confession." "What?" "A job." head of corporate ethics and internal investigation for Ashford International. You'll have full authority to audit every division, investigate any suspicious activity, and report directly to the board. Salary, benefits, and resources to build the kind of oversight that would have caught what Fenwick did 3 years ago. Talia felt like the ground had shifted. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you power, the ability to make sure what happened to Ryan never happens to anyone else in my company. His eyes were serious. You've spent 3 years building the skills to expose corporate corruption. I'm giving you the position to do it from inside the system that failed your brother. Why would I want to work for you? Because destroying me doesn't fix the system. It just puts someone else in my place. But reforming from within, with your skills and my resources, that might actually change things. It was the last thing she'd expected. Not money, not apologies, but actual structural power to prevent future victims. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire. He pulled out a card with his personal cell number. Call me when you decide. Talia left Ashford Tower holding 2 pieces of paper that represented completely different futures. The confession that would let her destroy Victor Ashford publicly, and the job offer that would let her change the system from within. For 3 years, she'd believed justice meant revenge, making the people who'd killed Ryan suffer the way he'd suffered. But standing in that office, seeing genuine regret in the eyes of a man powerful enough to deny responsibility forever, she'd realized something. Revenge would feel good for a moment. Reform could save lives for years. The choice wasn't as simple as she'd thought it would be. The Ashford Meridian Hotel's private dining lounge looked exactly the same. Talia walked through it in a tailored suit that cost more than 3 months of her old salary, her hair professionally styled, her bearing carrying the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms like this. Not as staff, but as power. She'd taken the job. Not immediately. She'd spent 2 weeks investigating whether Victor's offer was genuine or just another manipulation. What she'd discovered had surprised her. Victor Ashford, confronted with the actual details of Ryan's case and Fenwick's systemic corruption, had been genuinely horrified. He'd spent the years since Fenwick's arrest dismantling the legal and operational systems that had allowed such abuse. And he'd given Talia the authority to lead that transformation. As head of corporate ethics, she'd uncovered 3 more fraud schemes in the first 6 months, smaller than Fenwick's operation, but devastating to the people caught in them. She'd fired 12 executives, restructured 4 departments, implemented oversight systems that made it nearly impossible for future Miles Fenwicks to operate in the shadows. She'd also quietly used her position to help 7 other people who'd been wrongly accused in corporate fraud cases, people whose stories mirrored Ryan's, who'd been destroyed by systems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the innocent. Victor had supported every decision, even when it cost the company money and reputation. They'd built something unexpected, not friendship exactly, but mutual respect between 2 people who'd both learned painful lessons about the cost of negligence and the value of accountability. Ryan's name had been officially cleared. The wrongful conviction was expunged from record. A scholarship in his name now funded forensic accounting students at Penn State. It didn't bring him back, but it meant something. Talia stood at the window of the dining lounge where she'd once moved invisibly between tables, and Victor appeared beside her. "You come here often?" he asked with a slight smile, a private joke between them now. "Just remembering. The night you saved my life? The night everything changed. Changed for the better, I think." He handed her a document. "The board approved your proposal. Every Ashford International subsidiary will now have an independent ethics officer reporting directly to you. No exceptions." She took the document, feeling the weight of what they'd built together. "Ryan would have been proud of this," Victor said quietly. "He would have been proud that someone finally gave a damn about getting it right." They stood in silence. Two people who'd started as victim and victimizer, who'd been forced by circumstances to become something else entirely. Not friends, but partners in reformation. And sometimes that was worth more than revenge. Revenge is supposed to be simple. Someone destroys your life, you destroy theirs. Balance restored, justice served. But the truth Talia Brooks learned in that year working beside Victor Ashford was far more complicated. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't prevent future victims. Reform does. She'd started her journey planning to destroy two men who'd cost her brother his life. She'd ended it partnering with one to ensure no other family would suffer the same fate. Miles Fenwick was serving 23 years in federal prison, his name forever synonymous with corporate corruption. But more importantly, the systems he'd exploited had been dismantled and rebuilt with oversight that made such abuse significantly harder. Victor Ashford had accepted responsibility for his negligence, not just privately, but in restructuring his entire company to prioritize ethics over profit protection. It didn't erase what had happened to Ryan, but it meant something. Because justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent who come after. Talia had learned that the hard way. She'd had two choices: destroy the man whose systems had killed her brother, or use his resources and remorse to build something that would honor Ryan's memory by preventing future Ryans. She'd chosen reform over revenge, structural change over personal satisfaction, and in doing so, she discovered something unexpected. Power used to heal is more satisfying than power used to hurt. The real trap that night hadn't been the assassins surrounding Victor Ashford. It had been the belief that destruction was the only form of justice that mattered. Talia had learned to build instead. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that was the victory that actually changed the world. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about justice, accountability, and whether reform is more powerful than revenge, please consider liking and subscribing. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have chosen revenge or reform? What would justice look like to you? Thank you for watching. Until next time.